our last topic. Oops.
Those taxes we talked about last time. Yeah.
Uh,
Income taxes, which I didn't agree with.
oh, right. As far as as far as what you're allowed to, if you get a tax refund.
Yes, I still have a problem with that because I do installments. So, so I get, so I pay extra installments just to please them. And then I overpay, which I do usually sometimes, then I get a refund of 10,000, I pay tax and overpay my installments.
The text on when you pay back.
No, I overpay my installments.
Yeah.
And discussion, this week was like, so I get a refund from the government, refund. Do I pay tax on that? Oh, no, do I just write not tax, do I get, paid, Meister on that?
Okay, here we go. So you're right, Hal. The last discussion that we had was a person who gets a tax refund is who gets the refund? Does the charity get it or does the person get it? And obviously the answer is the person is entitled to it, but it's considered to be part of his regular income for which he has to take miser, for which he has to tithe. In other words, that's his after taxes income. Okay, so he has to tithe that if he hasn't tithed it already. Okay, next. So now we're up to the next shaila, which is Ashir Sha'asav Tzedakah Mishum She'ibedet Kaspo. Here's a person who's not poor, but he's temporarily poor because he finds himself in a place where he has no money. So he has to collect money as tzedakah in order to be able to get home. And now the question is, does he have to return the money to the donors afterwards? Okay, so here's the shaila. Adam Ashir Nasa Uman. Okay, so there's a wealthy guy, took a trip to Uman. Right. You know what the guy asked his wife? He said, honey, I'm going to Uman for Rosh Hashanah. What would you like me to daven for? So she said, a good shidduch. Yeah. Right. So he travels to Uman because I guess he's a breast lover. Ibetis Arnako loses his wallet. V'hitchiles of tzedakah kishar hakabtsanim ha'aniyim. And so he goes around just like any of the other, I guess there are a lot of mishulachim. When you go to Uman, you got a lot of guys who are asking for tzedakah. Yeah, because, breast love does tend to attract a certain element of people who are out of work, and because it provides hope and it provides inspiration to people who are feeling very, very down. So quite often it will attract people who are in the lower rungs of the socioeconomic scale. So you probably have a lot of people collecting tzedakah in Uman. And so this wealthy guy who loves Breslov Chasidus also finds himself walking around with the other Mishulachim collecting tzedakah so that he can just sustain himself while he's in Uman and make his way home. The Asaf Ka'arba Meos Dolar Litzara Chotzotov. He's able to collect about $400 American. Uvesov Chazar Lebeso. And then he makes it home. Ha'im hu tzarich lahachzir et hakesef litzdaka kevin shehu ashir. Is he obligated to return the money to charity because he himself is wealthy? In other words, what's the status of a person who's got plenty of money in the bank, but for certain reasons, based on the circumstances he's in, has no access to his money? So if he takes tzedakah during that time, does he have to return it to tzedakah? Or can he say, no, at that moment I was an ani, and therefore I was allowed to collect tzedakah and I was allowed to keep it? So any opinions?
I don't think he was ever an ani.
You don't think? You don't think he has to?
Yes, for everybody it's different, but if it's tzedakah, people they don't want anything in return.
Well, he's saying give it back.
But he wasn't
to another charity.
deserving.
He's not saying give it
No,
back.
he
to
was
the people.
deserving of it because he had to get home, so at that time he deserved.
But the question is whether he gives it back to.
But
whether he gives it back to
does
another
he,
charity.
does he have an obligation to take whatever he collected and give it to another charity?
Right.
Not to give it back to his original donors.
Right.
I mean, it would just be a nice thing to do. I don't think it's talking
Okay,
I agree with Errol. I think it's a nice thing.
be a nice thing to do, but maybe he's not obligated. Okay, let's see. Let's see what Rav Shiraga says. Kasav Maran b'Shulchan Aruch, hufkad etzlo mamon shel pidyon shvuyim, uba'u lav hanasim v'natan lahem et hakesef lahatzil et atzmo. So the Shulchan Aruch tells us the following case. If a person was entrusted with money for pidyon shvuyim, for ransoming captives, let's say a person was collecting money. I mean, we have captives now who are still hostages. And let's say a person was able to negotiate with some Hamas guy. Someone was willing to pay $1 million a hostage, right? So let's say we're able to negotiate, and then he brings the cash in with him. And as he's being brought in to Gaza to get the hostage, someone says, no, the $1 million is for your life. Give us the money or we're going to kill you. So he ends up surrendering the money, which he thought was going to be for the hostage, but is really to save himself. Im lo hayam matsui etzlo sham kesef acher livdot atzmo patur she'ein lecha pidyon shvuyim gadol mizeh. So the Shulchan Aruch paskins that if you're doing it to save your own life, you don't have to replace the money that you collected for pidyon shvuyim, because you yourself are redeeming yourself with that same money. In other words, the money was designated
Oh,
to
he
help.
collected it from other people?
He
Is that-
collected it from other people to save to save someone who's in captivity. And it turns out that on the way to bring that money to save the captive, he himself is held up for basically your money or your life. And so he's allowed to relinquish that money because he's using the money for this very same purpose that it was donated, which is to help get a person out of captivity. He saved himself from captivity or death,
Even though the
Okay.
money was given on the intent of being used for somebody else.
even though it was given for somebody else.
Possibly by that someone else's family member.
Yeah. Because of Sham Hasma, the Mimash Kosav Moran Lo Hayamatsui Etzlo Sham Kesef, the Sma in his commentary says, the fact that it says in the Shulchan Aruch that he doesn't have money with him, it's not that he doesn't have money, he just doesn't have money with him. Mashma da'afal pishu hu ashir v'yesh lo kesef. This implies that even though he's a man of wealth and he has money in the bank, mikol makom kevin she'ein lo kesef b'makom shabo ha'anasim, but since he doesn't have money with him now, where he's being held up, mutter liftot nafsho ba'oto kesef, he's permitted to redeem his own life with that money. And he doesn't have to replace that money when he gets back home. And the same thing was paskened by the Shulchan Aruch in Yoredeya, in the laws of charity. Bala bayis haholech mimakom lemakom, v'kolu ma'osav b'derech ve'en lo ma'lechol. A balabayit is traveling abroad, and he runs out of money, and he doesn't have food. So no tomei hatzdaka, he's allowed to go to the local charity and ask them for food. And when he gets back home, he's not obligated to make restitution. In other words, even though I go to the local Chabad, let's say in Thailand, and I say, I lost my wallet and I don't have any money, do you mind if I join you for the meals? So you're going to have a lot of hakaras hatov, and you're going to want to pay for the meals when you get back home, right? Obviously, you're going to want to do that, but are you mechuyev to do that? The Shulchan Aruch says you're not mechuyev to do that because shadino kamo adam ani shehashir shelo chayev l'shalim. Because you're no different from any other person who was poor at the time when he collected tzedakah and later became wealthy. Once you become wealthy, you're not obligated to repay all of the charity that was given to you. Now, the alkein benidon didan he'ashir potter milashalim litzdaka achar shechazer lebeso. And therefore, this wealthy person is exempt from having to pay back the charity that he collected when he gets back home. Okay, let's just take a look at some of the footnotes. He's right. So anyone who surmised that, you were on target. The cost of Habes Yosef Sham b'Shem Rabbeinu Yerucham, the lav dafka im natal mikupat hatzdaka de poter achakach milahachzir, elegam im kibel tzedaka me adam prati gam poter milahachzir lo acharkach. The Beis Yosef writes, it's not just when you take money from a charity pushka. In other words, it's not just when you go to the local shul or the local rabbi and you say, I need tzedakah, where he gives you from money that's already been collected from a pool of many donors. Even if you go over to a private individual and you say, I need your help, I don't have any money, and he gives you tzedakah so that you can buy food. So there too, you're also exempt, says the Beis Yosef. Avol hosif sham Rabbeinu Yerucham di'im hu yitva oso achar kach lahachzir lo et chaspo chayiv ha'ashir lahachzir lo. But if the person who gave you the money did not view it as charity, because he calls you or sends you an email later saying, I hope you made it home safely, you can kindly send the money that I gave you, send it to this PayPal account or whatever. He says, then the Rabbeinu Yerucham says you're obligated to return the money to him.
Afterwards, if you gave him the money, you should have, made that.
He should have stipulated it. But let's say the guy doesn't stipulate anything and he just says, I'm happy to help you out. How much do you need to tie you over until you get home? And the guy says, I need a couple of $100 just for food and transportation. No problem. Here it is. And let's stay in touch, he says. That's all he says. So you view it as tzedakah. He viewed it as a loan, but it wasn't specified. So Rabbeinu Yerucham says that if he asks you for the money, you have to give it back to him. The chen kasav hashach, and the shach writes the same thing. Ba'ayin ba'orach hashulchan shekasav shakol lefi ha'inyan, and the Orach HaShulchan, who's a later commentary, says that it all depends on the circumstances. De'im nikar hadavar she'evi lo et hakesef v'toras halva, az yachol l'tovo achar kach. He says, if it was clear based on the exchange that the two people had, that it was really meant as a loan, not as a charitable donation, then the giver has an has the right to ask for the money back. V'im nira shenasam lo b'toras tzedakah lo yuchal l'tovo achar kach. But if it's clear, he says, listen, I would hate for that to happen to me. I'm happy to give you the money, whatever you need. Just take it. It's my gift. And then afterwards, you can't ask the guy for the money back. So v'hinei ra'inu b'sefer chut ha'mishulash shekasav hagrach mivalajin b'shem hagra she'im ha'asher yachol lilvos eino nechshav shehu ani ela ashir v'lachein yihya aser lo lakachat mehatzdaka ayin sham. So this sefer brings from Reb Chaim Volozhin that if you're wealthy and you just have no money presently, and you just need, if you have the wherewithal to make a loan, to borrow money instead of taking from tzedakah, then it would be prohibited for you to take money from tzedakah. In other words, you're an uman and you have some friends who also are wealthy. If you can go over to them and say, can you please lend me the money? I need about $500 until between now and by the time I get home. Could you please lend me the money? And just say it's a loan. So then you have to take the loan before you resort to collecting tzedakah. V'chein pasku ha'orach hashulchan v'haderech emuna, and that's how these other paskin as well. Amnam b'sefer tzedakah u'mishpat, kasav l'dayek midivrei hasma, but Rav Blau infers from the Sma shehivi Rabbeinu Hagona Mechaber Shlita Le'el D'Svir Le'Shafilu Yim Yachol Lakachas Kesef Me'Hatzdaka B'Toras Halva Eino Chayiv Lasos Kain V'Ayin Od Sham. So it sounds like from the Sma that even if you could go over to the local shul and say, I just want to borrow money from the tzedakah and I'll pay it back. Even if you could do that, but you don't, you're well within your rights, because really a person who doesn't have money with him automatically qualifies as an ani. So I can guarantee you there have been times in each one of our lives where we've qualified as an ani and we're allowed to take money from tzedakah. It's not a good feeling. So therefore, if a person feels he wants to pay it back, then that would be the right thing to do. But halachically, you're not obligated to. That's the point that we're getting from this.
So it's in the moment, or it's when you have access to the money, because you can maybe don't have money right now, it doesn't can qualify like an oni. Somebody asking for money now, let's say somebody comes to you and says, then you have $100, why don't? But you can go to the bank, ATM machine, and get the $100. So you have access to it right away. So is that you don't have access completely in a day, or that you don't have?
You mean what is the time frame and what is the amount of inconvenience? It seems like if within reason you have access to money, right, then you don't qualify as an ani. You would only qualify as an ani if you don't have the wherewithal to have your next meal. So, for example, you could go to the bank in what is it? Is it Odessa? Where is Uman? Is it Odessa or Ukraine? I don't know.
It's in the Ukraine.
It's in Ukraine. So you could go to the bank in Ukraine, but the bank is closed and it's
There's banks in Oman, okay, so that's the you can, there are banks there.
yeah. So you can go to the bank, and how do you know? You've been there? Oh, okay.
Did you lose your wallet?
You need to get a
I
shit.
paid all my voice, but with my wife's permission and my wife's pushing me to go.
Okay.
So,
All right.
not doing
Yeah, that makes sense. I know your wife. Okay. So if you go to Uman, you can always go to the bank, but what if the bank's closed already and you don't have a meal and you want to be able to rely on others to purchase a meal for you, then you're permitted to take tzedakah. If you have easy access to an ATM, then you don't qualify as an ani.
Yeah.
You have to go to the ATM, take out the money. Do they have ATMs in Uman? Oh, okay, good. Glad to hear.
Like today, in today's world, it really, this type of thing should be very rare to ever, something like this to come out. If you lost his wallet.
Yeah.
A lot of things could go wrong, right? You lose your wallet, or like Marv said, your bank puts a freeze on your account for any number of reasons. I guarantee you it could happen even in 2025. We're in 2025, by the way. Okay. What's today? Today's the 2nd of January. Okay. All right. So now, bottom line is the person is exempt from paying back the tzedakah that he collected or that he accepted. Amnam ayin barambam beperisham mishnayos bepeyasham shekasav sheyesh la'ashir lahachzir litzedakah et ma shelakach mimidas chasidus. The Rambam says explicitly that it would be considered an act of piety to return the money that you took from tzedakah. V'hu devarav beridbaz al harambam v'chein kasav hagon Rabbi Akiva Eger al Mishnah bepeyasham b'diye kein mimasha kasav harambam b'zelashon, because this is the language that the Rambam uses, and this is how we can infer that. L'chashiyagia lebeso eno chayav l'shalem. When you get back home, after taking tzedakah when you were traveling, you're not obligated to pay back. Shaharei ani haya ba'oto sha'a, because you were a poor man at that moment. Mashma de'enu chayav midina, aval chayav mimidat chasidut. The statement "you're not obligated" means that we can't hold you halachically liable, but that doesn't mean that there's no moral obligation or a moral duty, let's say. Aval lichora milashon harambam sham shesiyim. But the fact that the Rambam says that you're no different from any poor person who became wealthy afterwards, that he doesn't have to return the tzedakah that he accepted, mashma shafilu midas chasidus ein kemo ani sheha'asher sheha'ashir shepashat she'enu chayv l'shalmi midas chasidus, because an ani who later became wealthy, even from a pietistic point of view, he has no moral duty to return the money that he collected all those years that he was poor. And so there's a certain ambiguity in the language of the Rambam, whether there's a pietistic duty to return that money. Amnam ein Rebbe Kiva Eger sham shehikshal Rambam da ha'isa b'chulin da hamazik matanos kahuna pater kevin da havimamon she'in lo tovim. So the Rebbe Kiva Eger challenges the Rambam because there's a Gemara in Chulin that says that if I destroy gifts that were supposed to go to Kohanim. So let's say a person tithed his produce, and before he had a chance to decide which Kohen he was going to give it to, I went ahead and for some reason I drove over that pile of grain and I destroyed it, making it no longer edible. Or whatever I did, I caused it to be damaged. Okay, so halachically the Gemara says, I'm putter from making restitution because there is no individual Kohen who can take me to Beis Din because it hasn't been designated for anybody yet. V'hikshasa ha-Gemara al zeh b'masha kasav b'mishnah b'peya da'ani haya ba'osasha da'davka ani putter aval asher shalak achayim v'kasha da'havi mamon she'in lo tovim. So Rabbi Kiva Eger asks a question. He says, the Mishnah says that if you were poor at that moment, and because you didn't have your wallet, and then so you're allowed to collect tzedakah, and you have therefore no obligation to return the money. He says, why would you have an obligation even if you were wealthy and you accepted money from tzedakah? If let's say I'm a wealthy person and someone gives me charity money and says, here, keep it, am I obligated to return it to charity? So the implication is, yes, I am, if I was wealthy. If I have money in my pocket and a guy comes to me and says, here, we're giving away free meals in Uman, and it's from a particular charity. You say, I don't want charity. He says, no, take it anyway. So is there an obligation for me to return that money? The implication is no. The implication is yes, you do have an obligation to give it back, because only if you didn't have money are you allowed to accept money from charity. But if you have money, you're not allowed to accept money from charity. So why don't we say, based on the Gemara in Chulin, that there's no one claiming that money? When there's no one claiming that money, it seems to be that you're exempt. V'tirtza ha-Gemara midas chasidus shanukan. The answer is that this is the Gemara that asked this question. And the Gemara answers because there's a pietistic duty. And Rashi explains, the Asher Shalokach me'atzdaka shelo birshus, chayiv lahachzir rak midas chasidus. It sounds like, from what Rashi says, that if a wealthy person takes money from tzedakah, he only has a pietistic duty to return that money. Umashma shani shalokach beheter gomer potim lahachzir afilu midas chasidus. Ad kan tochen divrei hagon Rabbi Kiva Eger v'hiniach b'tzarachiyim. So Rabbi Kiva Eger says it's only mashma from the Gemara that you have a pietistic duty to return the money if you accepted the money when you had money yourself from charity. But if you didn't have money at the time when you accepted money from charity, then you don't even have a pietistic duty to return the money. Okay, so anyway, so this is his question. And basically, he's just going through this. He says, "Bilichor hayanir liyashiv the kavanas hagemara haisa sheha'asher chayv l'shalem midinei shamayim va'ani pater l'shalem midinei shamayim." Perhaps, maybe what the Gemara means is that there's a heavenly obligation to pay back the money, but not a based-in obligation to pay back the money, which is different from Hasidus, which is pietistic. Ela shaharambam chidush shagam ba'ani yesh inin sheyashalmi midas chasidus v'lo latzes yidei shamayim shuvra yisu shechein tiritz b'sefer nesiv meir ala Rambam. He's getting into a little bit technical issues there. He's splitting hairs between a heavenly duty versus a pietistic duty.
Did you read somewhere in what we've just studied, that if you had the money, that you didn't have access to it, that you should ask for a loan?
Yes,
There's a loan?
yes. There are some opinions who say that, and this is from the Reb Chaim Volozhiner, that if you have the money, but you don't have access to it, like you just said, you should try, instead of taking tzedakah money, you should try to borrow the money. That would be a preferable way of avoiding having to accept charity.
Accept charity.
But if that doesn't work, then you are allowed to accept charity.
But in the case of the person giving a free meal, like. You have the ability to pay for your meal, but this person's forced to this free meal.
And that's true. Well, and so he's basically saying, here, take the money. We're giving away free food.
Yeah.
You're allowed to accept free food from tzedakah, even if you have money, if the tzedakah wants to give it away. In other words, let's say, for example, it's something perishable. You know, it happens all the time. The shul has leftover food.
Right.
And it's saying, you know, why don't you take this home? Use it, because otherwise we're going to have to throw it away. That for sure you're allowed to accept
Well,
from
I
charity.
was thinking of someone, JLIC, for example, who encourages students to come to functions by giving them food.
Or alcohol.
Whichever. Whichever.
No.
Let's not go too far down the track. So a number of those students are able to look out for themselves one way or another, right?
Yeah,
So how does that fit into what we talk about here?
that's where the charity is using food as a means of getting people to study Torah or to do a mitzvah. And that's actually what the function of that charity is. So it's completely permissible for the young man or woman to accept that, even though they don't need the money.
And it's not seen as it's a charitable act, but not as charity for the.
It's not charity technically because they're not aniyim. They don't qualify as poor people. But at the same time, if I make a donation to JLIC, for example, I can count that as tzedakah, even though the money's not going to poor people. That was part of our whole discussion when we learned the halachas of tzedakah. If I give tzedakah to an organization that does not deal with poor people, but let's say it's an outreach organization, it teaches Torah to young university students, or it's a synagogue, and it uses the money to make purchases for, yayin l'kiddush v'havdalah, right? Wine for kiddush and havdalah that the shul does every Shabbos, which is not necessarily for the poor. So is that considered to still be a fulfillment of my obligation of tzedakah if I'm carefully tallying my tithing? And the answer is that it does, according to most poskim. Okay, we're going to hold it here for today.